All right. One of the reasons that we all really like sine is because it starts at 0, correct? Cosine and tangent and secant, they start at technically negative pi over 2. And what's tricky about these graphs are, do you remember how we talked about you can change the period, make it bigger or smaller, and then shift it left and right? When you take the piece of the wave that doesn't start at 0, it will actually shrink or expand the graph and then shift it. So it doesn't work out as perfectly as it does with sine and cosine because those start at 0. They shrink to 0, they come back from 0. So that's why we want to definitely follow like a pattern for the two different examples. Here's what I mean by that. If I look at tangent, how many key points does tangent have that you need to put on the x-axis? Tangent. 1 key point and how many asymptotes? 2. So that's 3 key values along the x-axis. So what I would do is just like we've been doing with sine and cosine, I would say, okay, at negative pi over 2, at 0, and at pi over 2, I'm going to set each of these equal to x minus pi over 3. Does this look familiar? Take them and set them up. Okay? But here's what we need to remember when we do this. When I find this one, it's going to be an asymptote. When I find this one, it's going to be a key point, and when I find this one, it's going to be an asymptote. So I'm going to graph them on the x-axis, like put the actual locations, but what they transfer to in the graph is going to be a little bit differently than what we always did with sine and cosine. So what's negative pi over 2 plus pi over 3 when I solve the first one? What do I get? X equals what? X is equal to negative pi over 6. How's that? Better? Sounds good. All right, so tangent. Notice I have no sign negative out front, so it's going to still be between here and here is what I'm thinking is quadrant 1, which should be up top here, right? But what did the 2 do? It makes it steeper. And then the minus 1 just tells me my center line is at minus 1. So I can go ahead and graph this, and I can simply say that this is steeper. So it looks like regular old tangent. Okay? This is kind of the new process, is taking the 3, keep knowing, number 1, there's only 3 key values, but number 2, knowing whether I'm plotting points or asymptotes. Now let's talk about the period. What is the period normally for tangent? The period's normally pi, right? It's normally pi. Did I change the period at all? No. Okay, so the period didn't change, and if you notice that this is 1 pi over 6 to 5 pi over 6, isn't that a total of 6 pi over 6, which is 1 pi? It does match to what we're saying. Okay, the period is pi in length. I would also accept if you told me it starts here and it ends here. Give me the starting and ending values. My horizontal asymptote is at negative 1. My amplitude technically is 2, which makes it steeper. We talked about that graphically. And my phase shift is the fact that it went, right, pi over 3. Why did that not happen? This is supposed to be a positive. Nobody told me it's a positive either. Positive or negative? It's a negative. I'm like totally confusing you right now. Thank God we're going to do another one. And I'll redo this one. We're going to do another one, definitely, no doubt. So this is actually, how did we shift this? We went left pi over 6, is that right? No, we didn't. What did we do? We went right pi over 3. Why is it right pi over 3? Oh my god, my brain. I'm going to die. Well, I'm going to die. How do you all feel? I can only imagine. Secant. Secant goes back to what graph? Secant's going to be based off of cosine. Okay? So that's my first thought. Secant goes back to cosine. I hate cosine because it starts at 0, right? But then we have to back it up to negative pi over 2. So I've got all of these values. I've got negative pi over 2. I've got 0. I've got pi over 2. I've got pi. And I've got 3 pi over 2. Again, because I'm dealing with the cup functions, this is an asymptote, this is a value, this is an asymptote, this is a value, this is an asymptote. Yes? Okay, does anyone have a question on that little chart that I started over there on the right? Alright, so I'm going to set this equal to this entire quantity, so 2x plus pi over 2. What is my first value? This is easy math. Negative pi over 2 minus pi over 2 is minus 1. Divided by 2 gives me what? Negative pi over 2? You just went nowhere? Well, we did though. Let me show you where we went. Negative pi over 2. So you get 2x is equal to negative 1 pi. X is equal to negative pi over 2. Okay, there's my first value, and we said it was an asymptote, so I can draw that right in as an asymptote. Then I go to 0. When I plug this in for 0, I'm going to switch this over to orange. Here I'm going to say 2x plus pi over 2 is equal to 0. Then I get negative pi over 4. So at negative pi over 4, I'm going to have a possible cup function. I don't know if I have to count off of there to find it, so I'll wait to do that one. The next one I have is going to be 0. X equals 0. If you had to guess, what do you think the next orange one is if we didn't want to solve an equation? Following the pattern, pi over 4. And then the last one is pi over 2. Yes? All right, just real quickly, 3, 2, 1. How many are at like a 3 with just that part? You're good with that? You get asymptotes, points. I haven't confused you thoroughly. How many are at a 2? 1, first finger only. Okay, perfect. All right, so 5 key values. Now, when I look up here, and I want to graph this, where's my center line at? Center line is at plus 1, and secant is based on cosine. Cosine is always a mountain and then a valley, just like sine would be when we shift it back to the left. This is positive, so I'm still going to have a mountain, but I'm going to count how many points. Up 2, 1, 2, and remember it's cup up. It never crosses the center line with the arrows. From here, I'm going to count 1, 2 down, and it opens downward. So if I go up top here, we want to take out the 2, x plus what? Pi over, you know what number goes in the bottom? So that when you multiply 2 times it, you get pi over 2? 4. Okay, so my period is going to be to take 2 pi and divide it by 2, which is this 2 right here, which gives me pi in length. Y equals 1. The amplitude is 2. America.
Stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
And ultimately, I have a phase shift of left pi over 4, which comes from here.
For today are as follows. The Easton Area School District will host an important opiate education session for students and parents this coming Monday, December 4th at 7 p.m.